A clap for, so here's the thing, should I clap for Ryan beforehand and then you say roll?
No, you're rolling right now.
Okay, all right. Okay, Ryan, clap for the Wolfman. Audio, couple. Okay, 3, 2. Welcome back to the Steve Max Muscle Car. Okay, welcome back to the Steve Max Muscle Car Show podcast, brought to you by High Octane Classics, the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership, located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. I can call them at 508-859-4515. And they're a new sponsor, so I haven't memorized all that stuff, but I know those folks over there, and Dan and the bunch are really, really good people. A lot of cool cars, everything from Fords to Ferraris. And speaking of Fords, in this episode, or this show, which is episode number 40, we're reading from my 1001 Muscle Car Facts book, which came out, I think, back in 2013, whatever it was. And in this particular show, we're in the Ford and Mercury and Lincoln vehicle chapter. And right now we're continuing with the suspension and brakes part of the book. If you have it at home, you'll know that these chapters are broken up into a variety of different subsets. In fact, each chapter for, say, Pontiac, Plymouth, whatever it might be, each one has legend and lore, body and interior, engine and driveline, suspension and brakes, and finally number crunching and press commentary. Each of those 5 little subsections will accompany each make. So here we are, we're in the middle of suspension and brakes, so let us now continue. This is fact 576. A decade after front disc brakes became available for big Mercurys, the first Mercury offering, not including Pantera, with 4-wheel disc brakes arrived in 1976, but it wasn't a traditional muscle model. Rather, it was the full-size Marquis, and the $300 package was available on police cars and station wagons. Also shared with Ford LTDs, the extra braking power was commonly combined with the 460 V8 and heavy-duty trailer towing package in those pre-SUV days when full-size wagons were primarily tow vehicles. The novel brake package was discontinued aboard the downsized full-size Mercury models of 1979. And I remember as a kid here in North Brookfield, Massachusetts, where we're taping this right now, I was riding my bike and I saw this guy changing the rear tire on his Ford LTD wagon. And I said, "That's a disc brake." I rolled in and he goes, "Oh yeah, I tow my trailer with this thing." And there was a disc brake on the back of his 9-inch rear axle in a full-size Ford. And that's when I realized, oh yeah, they put disc brakes on full-size cars, but not muscle cars, but rather the trailer towers and cop cars too. So we now move on. Okay, fact 577. A year after the big Mercurys got 4-wheel discs, the mid-size 1977 through 1980 Lincoln Versailles arrived on the scene, also with disc brakes all the way around. Not a performance car, the Versailles is still of interest to 1960s Cougar and Mustang owners because its rear axle is a direct bolt-in swap. The 58-inch track width, leaf spring mounts, and 5 on 4.5-inch bolt circle make it a very popular addition to any pre-1971 Cougar in need of better braking. It's true. I think it was Hot Rod magazine sometime around 1979 or so broke the news that if you found a Lincoln Versailles in the junkyard, you could snatch the rear axle and instantly have 4-wheel disc brakes on your Mustang or Cougar. That axle bolts right in. And again, the track on that thing is 58 inches. And the track, of course, is the distance between the center line of the tires width-wise, so they don't stick out too much, they don't stick in too much. So again, the Lincoln Versailles 9-inch is a direct bolt-in to Mustangs and Cougars. The only downside to them, and something that was overlooked back in the day, is that the calipers and the rotors on Lincoln Versailles are big, heavy iron things. So today you'd probably want to go with a Willwood or an aftermarket disc brake conversion. But again, back in the day, a Lincoln Versailles in a junkyard always had the rear axle missing within a day of its arrival. Okay, more goodies here with fact 578. The first Mercury factory drag package equipped with rear disc brakes was the flip-top Comet fleet of 1966. Unlike the Holman and Moody stretch-nosed AFX Mustangs of the same year, which were fitted with 10-inch drum brakes on the rear axle, Mercury continued the space-age theme of the flip-top funny cars by specifying lightweight aluminum rotors from the Kelsey Hayes Research and Development Department. Okay, continues. Following Fran Hernandez's command to L. Turner to just do it, There you go. Okay, yeah, Fran Hernandez and Al Turner worked at Mercury. So Fran Hernandez told Al Turner to just do it. Okay, following Fran Hernandez's command to Al Turner to just do it, see item 591 coming up in a little while, no holes were barred in the quest for ultimate mass reduction on those flip-top funny cars. To prevent the soft aluminum from wearing rapidly on those rotors, a specific die-packed facing was sprayed onto the virgin aluminum, then baked in place for durability. A pair of Mustang type, though cast of thicker metal, 4-piston calipers applied the squeeze. To get a good look at those disc brakes on the back of those 1966 flip-top Mercury funny cars, Hot Rod magazine, I think the April 66 issue, I forget exactly what month, but it has Dino Don's orange Comet on the cover. Beautiful shot. In that story, you'll see a beautiful color shot of those prototype Kelsey Hayes disc brakes on the back of that flip-top funny car. And indeed, the brake rotors were aluminum. But again, you know, sort of in the days of long before ceramic coatings and that sort of a thing, they actually sprayed a coating onto the rotors so they would remain light and not have like an integral iron liner, but they stayed light. But again, it was a spray-on stuff. I would bet you that those rotors were only good for a few stops from 180 miles an hour. But there they were, the first Mercury with all-wheel discs, flip-top funny cars in 1966. Moving on. Okay, fact 579. The Cougar Super Competition Handling Package was standard on the 1968 Cougar GTE and included 6-inch wheels, a 0.85-inch diameter front roll bar, 124 pounds per inch front coil springs, and 128 pounds per inch rear leaf springs, all pretty stiff stuff. For comparison, the standard 68 Cougar suspension, as fitted to 302 cars, just basic stuff, included 5.5-inch wheels, half-inch narrower, 0.72-inch diameter front roll bar, 10% smaller, 88 pounds per inch front coil springs versus 124, and 78 pounds per inch rear leaf springs. The 1968 GTE was a great start, but by all accounts, the best handling Mercury Cougar was the 1969 and 70 Eliminator Boss 302, which had 6-inch wheels, a 0.95-inch diameter front roll bar, 130 pounds per inch front coil springs, 145 pounds per inch rear leaf springs, and a new secret weapon, a half-inch diameter rear sway bar. Though its canted valve Boss 302 was heavier than the Windsor-based 302, a lightweight aluminum intake manifold helped offset the gain. The 428 Cobra Jet R-Code Eliminator may have been stronger at the drag strip, but for all-around fun, no Cougar Eliminator beats the G-Code Boss 302 version. You gotta remember, of course, the Cougar Eliminator was, you know, one of the first high-performance muscle versions of the Cougar, and they came with a variety of different engines. The base was the 351 Windsor 4-barrel, kind of a ho-hum engine, 300 horse, I think it was. And of course, you could move up to the 390 big block with a 4-barrel carburetor, or more exotic stuff, the 428, which was a good straight line car, or that G-Code, Boss 302, which could absolutely be had in a Cougar Eliminator in 69 or 70. And again, when you got the Boss 302, you got the special suspension as outlined right there. Okay, moving on to fact 580. Back to funny cars. How about the 180 mile per hour flip-top Comet's front brakes? There were none. These cars weighed about 1,700 pounds and were fitted with skinny Denman front tires. Their minuscule contact patch offered minimal braking force. Instead of brakes, each Comet was fitted with a 12-foot Deist cross-form parachute for initial deceleration. From there, the experimental Kelsey Hayes aluminum rear disc brakes took over and worked very well. Of course, those disc brakes, the ones we talked about a moment ago, in fact, 578. But again, you know, front tires, skinny as they are, if you lock them up, they're just going to skid. Because again, it's all about the contact patch. And those flip-top Comets, of which I think 6 were built in 1966, no front brakes, no problem. Again, the parachute did most of the stopping. And again, they were drag race only vehicles. Okay, a little bit more on fact 580. Incidentally, one of the 4 factory flip-top Comets proved their worth. Logie Brothers, which produced the tube frames, was free to build them for competing match race teams. These non-factory back cars were typically fitted with aftermarket Hurst Earhart rear disc brakes. The experimental Kelsey Hayes aluminum parts were being somewhat difficult to obtain by outsiders. It's true that when you bought a funny car from the Logie Brothers, who made them for Ford as well, and Lincoln Mercury, You didn't get the experimental Ford Kelsey Hayes aluminum disc, but rather you got some Hurst Earhart goodies, which were just as good. Okay, we're going to switch channels a little bit here from suspension and brakes into the final sub-chapter in the Ford Lincoln Mercury chapter, which is called Number Crunching and Press Commentary. This is almost the most fun part of the book, really, because here we get to talk about statistics, how many of this was sold, how many of that was sold, how rare things are, and also what the magazines had to say about these cars when they were new. So let's get started with fact 581. Mercury was the first Detroit automaker to break the 400 horsepower mark with the 1958 430 Super Marauder engine, a one-year wonder. Seemingly emulating the nuclear chess game being played out between Washington and Moscow at the time, the Cold War, the Super Marauder trumped the Chrysler 392 Hemi, Tri-Power Pontiac, and Olds J2 with a trio of Holley 2300 series two-barrel carburetors, finned aluminum valve covers, and a massive cast aluminum air cleaner housing, all perched atop the largest domestic V8 in the business, a 430. Offered in 1958 Mercury, Montclair, Monterey, and Park Lane models, the Super Marauder engine was developed by Bill Strope's race shop. The 430 Host engine was an unusual creature. Its in-block combustion chambers and chamberless cylinder heads bore a close thematic resemblance to the Chevy 348 and 409. Of course, the 348 was also released in 1958. And those engines are pretty hard to come by today. But again, if you see one, you'll never forget it. It has a huge rectangular aluminum air cleaner on top, which matches the aluminum finned valve covers. And again, the 2300 series Holley is a big carburetor. It's very different from the Rochester 2CGs that you'll find on like Olds J2s or Pontiac Tri-Powers. They were large carburetors. And again, the 400 horsepower rating on the 430 Mercury Super Marauder, well, some folks will say that wasn't really 400 because a lot of those Detroit engines in the 50s, well, there was an advertising game going on. And was it really 400 horsepower? Don't know. They claimed it, and that's a first. Okay, move on. Fact number 582. Nearly 20,000. Given the need for labor-intensive hand finishing, paint matching headaches, and constant fitment challenges, that's a lot of fiberglass hoods to offer on a regular production model, 20,000. But that's what Mercury did in 1966 and 67 with the muscular Comet Cyclone GT. Specifically, production totals in 1966 were 15,970, of which 13,812 were hardtops and just 2,158 were convertibles. And in 1967, when 3,797 were made, again, these are the fiberglass hoods on those Comet GT Cyclones, and again in 67, there were 3,419 hardtops and only 378 convertibles. Competing fiberglass hood campaigns from rival Detroit muscle makers were generally less ambitious, while Lincoln Mercury on the Cougar, or the Cyclone, the Cyclone gave you about 20,000 units. Over at Dodge, the 69.5 Super B, well, only 1,907. Over at Plymouth, the 6-barrel of 69, only 1,432. And moving up to 1970, the Challenger TA, only 2,399 fiberglass hoods were installed. In 1970, the AAR CUDA, only 2,727. And over at GM, again, cousins, the 1970 through 72 Olds 442 with the W25 outside air induction, there were something like 8,547. So remember, 20,000 Cyclones were built in 66 and 7 with fiberglass hoods. And ironically, AMC was pretty close. They cranked out more than 15,000 fiberglass hoods on standard 1971 through 74 Javelin AMXs. The only fiberglass hood campaign that netted more units than Cyclone were the 1970 through 75 Pontiac Firebird Formula 350, 400, and 455, of which 59,670 were made, and of course Chevrolet's Plastic Wonder, the Corvette, but that's kind of cheating because the entire body was made of fiberglass. But keep in mind, 20,000 fiberglass hoods, and with fiberglass's wavy tendencies, it must have been really tough for quality control guys to make sure that they were as nice as they could be. And again, Mercury had a higher standard than most other car makers, so it was probably a headache. But they're nice, they're light, they look good. Okay, fact 583, $2 million. That was the projected cost of producing the 1970 King Cobra Cyclone Spoilers 2 front clip in steel. By contrast, the fiberglass panels used on the 6 pre-production styling and test cars were far less expensive and could have sufficed if NASCAR hadn't bumped minimum production requirements from 500 in 1969 to 2 cars per dealership in 1970. The new math for 1970 would have required construction of nearly 3,000 cars, and procuring as many warp-free fiberglass nose clips for those King Cobras and Super Cobra Spoiler 2s would have been a nightmare. So steel became the material of choice. Coincidentally, early in 1970, Henry Ford II fired Bunky Knudsen, who had been a major proponent of the win on Sunday, sell on Monday strategy. He was replaced by the more practical Lee Iacocca, who immediately slashed Ford racing budgets by 75%. In this corporate climate, $2 million was simply too much to ask, and the 1970 Cyclone Super Spoiler and Torino King Cobra programs were quickly abandoned. Now, if you love those cars, I think it was Motor Trend magazine around 1970 or so that had a beautiful color story on them. Yellow car, look for it on eBay. Okay, we have to go back to thanking our sponsors. And again, we have to remember that the Steve Max Muscle Car Show podcast is brought to you by High Octane Classics, the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. Give them a call at 508-859-4515. Okay, more numbers with fact 584. S55 or S23. What's the difference? Though built by fiercely competing makes, Mercury and Plymouth with the S23 and Mercury for the S55, the 1962, 1963 and a half, and 1966 Mercury S55, of which 3,613 were built in 62, 8,762 were built in 63, and 3,585 built in 1966, and the Plymouth S23 Sport Fury of 1970, where only 689 were built. They have intriguing similarities. They both rode on a 120-inch wheelbase and targeted buyers looking for sporty flair in a full-size platform with standard V8 power. In the case of the S55 Mercury, 390, 406, or 427 was power. And in the case of the Plymouth S23 Fury, the 318 was the base power, though a lot of them also got 383 big blocks. Contrary to suspicions that former Mercury product planners were behind the Plymouth S23 program, because the name's so similar to S55, it's simply a case of random coincidence. The Mercury S55 nomenclature derives from the division's flirtation with alphanumeric model designations, also employed on the sporty compact 1961 through 63 S22 Comet and 1962 and 63 Mercury Meteor S33. By contrast, Plymouth simply used its VIN identification code for the S23. In Plymouth speak, an RS23 body is nothing more than a Plymouth, that's the R, Sport Fury, that's the S, two-door hardtop, and 23, of course, is that two-door hardtop body, so RS23. If anything, Plymouth's S23 moniker was likely influenced by Chevrolet's successful evolution of the 1967 Camaro Z28 Special Performance Package RPO code as an actual model identification badge. So, copy from the best, but nobody's going to confuse a Camaro Z28 from a Plymouth S23, although a big Mercury S55 and an equally massive Fury S23, well, they might be confused. Okay, let's move on to fact 585. The Comet nameplate got its start in 1960 affixed to a slightly upsized Ford Falcon shell. Despite some mid-sized detours along the way and a one-year hiatus in 1970, the Comet name again appeared on a compact car for its final go-round in 1971. Based on the Ford Maverick, let's compare the first and last Comets of 1960 and 1971. Wheelbase was 114 inches in 1960 versus 103 inches in 1971. Got smaller. Length overall was 194.8 inches in 1960 versus 181.7 inches in 71. Again, it got smaller. Height was 54.5 inches in 1960 versus 52.5 in 1971. Yep, smaller. The 1971 Comet was a success with 83,000 built, accounting for 22.7% of all Mercury sales in 1971. Yeah, we all remember the Mercury Cyclone Comet from the 60s, which was a muscle car. But again, we get to 71, and the Comet was strictly an economy car. And I believe there was a Comet GT, which went along with the Ford Maverick Grabber. But again, either or both of those cars, the craziest things got under the hood was a 302 two-barrel. There were no Boss 302s, no 428s, none of that stuff. Although a variety of drag races would take their Comets and their Mavericks and put Boss 429s and single-head Chem 427s for the early days of pro stock drag racing. But again, those were one-off drag cars, not production pieces. All right, fact 586. Automotive journalists writing about not yet released new cars have a really tough job. They have to balance educated guesses and facts, often only to look dumb with the passage of time. I know, I've been there. The headline cover blurb of the May 1970 issue of Car Life magazine touts, quote, Ford's new DeTomaso Cobra, unquote. Cobra? Yes, Cobra. The story inside depicts a production-ready mid-engine DeTomaso, but nowhere in the piece is the car's eventual name, Pantera, mentioned. Rather, the story admits, quote, the Cobra name is, at this writing, tentative. The problem is that Ford's use of Cobra on sedans may have erased from the average mind the image of performance that it gained from the real Cobras from the Shelby Works, unquote. That's true. The Pantera was almost called Cobra, but because, they used the Cobra name on those Fairlanes and Torinos with the 428 power plant, I guess they wisely said, we better start from scratch and just call it the Pantera. So DeTomaso Pantera it is. Was. Okay, fact 587. This is going to be a quote. We arrived at... Okay, now, check this out. There's a typo in my book. Look at this. Page 231. MBULU. You know what? Maybe that's not a typo. No, it's not. Okay, this is not the word Malibu. It actually is Mubulu. It's, I guess, an African town. All right, here we go. Back to the top. Okay, fact 587. We arrived at Mumlu, M-B-U-L-U. Must be a town in Africa. Okay, we arrived at Mumlu early in the morning hours, and just before checking in, the control ran into a barrage of huge rocks lopped off roadside banks by some fun-loving local residents. We just missed getting a cannonball variety rock through the passenger's window as the missile neatly flattened the drip molding on that side, end quote. Hot Rod magazine publisher Ray Brock must have had some fun as co-pilot of the Bill Stroh prepared number 73 Comet Caliente during the running of the 1964 East African Safari. A 5-day torture test of man and machine, only 100 of the 3,100-mile course was paved, so rocks were easily obtained. Brock and driver Norman Garotreau survived the ordeal, but their Comet was a did not finish thanks to a washed out bridge. Yeah, check that out. Folks throwing rocks at rally cars. Okay, let's move on. Fact 588. Quote, DeTomaso had been producing one Mangusta per day when he, company head Alejandro DeTomaso, signed the 3-year contract with Ford last September 1969 to produce the new Cobra. Ford bought a Mangusta and another Italian mid-engine car, a Lamborghini Miura, sometime back and took them both down to the last bolt. They found a remarkable amount of bad planning in the Mangusta. In other words, poor passenger and driver comfort, poor placement of driving controls, and uninspired acceleration from the 289 V8, end quote. The resulting Pantera, tentatively identified as a Cobra in this May 1970 Car Life magazine reference, benefited from heavy involvement from Ford's Dearborn engineering and design staff, plus the much-needed infusion of 351 Cleveland power. Again, this is a reference to the notion that Ford almost called the Pantera a Cobra. And again, fact 586, which we read a moment ago, references that fact. And keep in mind that the Mangusta, which they purchased to test alongside that Lamborghini Miura, only, quote unquote, had a 289, which, 270 horsepower, something like that. So the 351 Cleveland, which wound up going into the Pantera, something like 80 cubic inches larger and certainly 330 horsepower net, so a big jump in power. So it's surprising to think that Lincoln or Ford thought that the Mangusta was kind of weak on acceleration, but they sure fixed it with the Pantera. Okay, more Mangusta facts with fact 589. The mid-engine 1967 through 71 DeTomaso Mangusta's 32 front, 68 rear weight distribution was too much of a good thing. When driven hard into a corner at the limit of tire adhesion, 1,944 pounds, or 68%, of the Mangusta's total of 2,860 pounds was prone to suddenly taking the lead and spinning the car out. For the redesigned Pantera, the folks in Modena, Italy, and Dearborn, United States, conspired to create a kinder 42 front, 58 rear weight distribution. Panteras are thus much better handling cars than the Mangustas when taken to the limit. Now I've never driven either of these cars at full speed, but we got to remember the brand new Corvette, the C8. Well, that is a mid-engine car, so clearly that was and is the way to go. But it can be taken to the extreme, and yeah, you can have too much weight over the rear of the car, as demonstrated by the Mangusta, which was very much a tail-happy creature when driven hard. Okay, more info here with fact 590. Unlike the crafty folks at Pontiac, who notoriously provided the motoring press with things like 421 power GTOs, masquerading as stock 389s, Mercury, like Ford, occasionally erred in the opposite direction. In the July 1968 issue of Car Life magazine, a Cougar XR7 was tested. But it wasn't just any Cougar. Rather, it was an early build W code 427 Crossbolt. The R code 428 Cobra jet replaced it mid-year. So why, oh why, did Mercury fit the magazine test car with a mundane open differential better suited to a villager station wagon? The article author quoted, quote, "Quarter-mile times were just over 15 seconds, not quite up to supercar status. Much of the 427 strong low-speed torque went up in right rear tire smoke," end quote. A mere $41.60 covered the cost of a limited slip differential and produced much more noteworthy 14-second times. A total of 357 1968 Cougars were equipped with the 427 engine. The late arriving 428 Cobra jet was installed in just 37 cars. Though far less common, the mundane 428 still plays second fiddle to the NASCAR-bred 427 in collector circles today. Yeah, it was kind of a classic thing. In 1965, I remember that Hot Rod magazine tested a Ford LTD with the 7-liter option. Again, dual quads, 4-speed tranny, 2-door car, really good looking car. Trouble is, it had an open differential. There's a great shot of the car frying the right rear tire as the ET went up in smoke. So yeah, again, the Ford test cars, sometimes, they gave things to the magazines which they probably shouldn't have done. Quite the opposite of Pontiac giving the magazines, fake cars like 421 power GTOs, but it all fit into the big picture. All right, let's go on to fact number 591. The two men responsible for inventing the flip-top funny car in 1966 were Mercury race chief Fran Hernandez and his drag race specialist Al Turner. According to Leo Levine's The Dust and the Glory, a great book, Hernandez and Turner shared this distinction. Hernandez said, quote, "I want you to go out and think how you would have built the most way-out car ever built. We would be the ultimate cheaters. The weight objective would be 1,700 pounds, end quote. Turner replied, "You can't build a car that light." To which Hernandez said, "I didn't ask you to do that, just do it," unquote. Hernandez then added, quote, We're going to take the attitude that we're the dumbest guys in the world. We're not going to use anything because so-and-so is using it, so it must work. And everything we do, we're going to have to justify to ourselves on paper before we do it," end quote. The resulting flip-top Comet funny cars revolutionized the sport. Levine's book continues, quote, "There was no vehicle of the same type that could even touch them. Through 1966, the Comet drag racing team won 86% of the races in which they participated. Don Nicholson, the most successful of the group, wound up with a 130-10 win-loss record, which at one time included a match race win streak of more than 30 straight," end quote. Yeah, it's true that the flip-top funny cars of 1966 were truly revolutionary. In fact, every time you watch an NHRA Top Fuel funny car, you can thank Al Turner and Fran Hernandez for dreaming up those outrageous flip-top fiberglass bodies sitting on tube frames. Okay, we're getting close to the end of our show. We've got 2 more facts to go. And here is fact number 592. Nearly 2 decades after the flip-top funny car's first appearance, Stuart Turner was assigned control over Ford Motorsport of Europe to help transform the company's image. One of Turner's first tasks was the creation of the Sierra RS Cosworth, a limited production special powered by a dual overhead cam inline turbo 4. Similar in appearance to the Mercury XR4 Ti imported to the United States, Turner's Sierra RS Cosworth debuted in 1986, 2 decades after Al Turner's single overhead cam Comets took to the strip, and went on to numerous victories in Group A touring car and Group B rally competition. So here's the big question. Were Mercury's Al Turner and Ford Europe's Stuart Turner related? Not by blood. Big Al is a Yank, while Stu is a Brit, though both enjoyed careers at Ford Mercury, just on different continents. Okay, here's our final fact, number 593 of this show. Only 2 of the 4 Lincoln Mercury vehicles bearing the Capri nameplate qualify as performance cars. The 1951 through 59 Lincoln Capri, early versions of which were formidable road race champions, and the 1978 through 86 Mercury Capri RS hatchback, which shared the Mustang GT's potent 5-liter drivetrain. It's interesting to note that the sales of each version reflects the time in which it was marketed. Lincoln's luxury yacht sold 126,449 units. The German-board semi-fastback of 1970 through 78 found 464,729 buyers. The aforementioned Fox-bodied Capri, the muscle version, accounted for 300,356 sales between 1979 and 86, and the more recent convertible-only Mazda 323-based front-wheel drive Capri Roadster of 1991 through 1994 attracted a mere 66,382 buyers worldwide. Of the lot, it is fair to say the German-bred compact has the largest following, that one, of course, being the 1970 through 78 Capri and Capri 2. The near 500,000 imported to the United States doesn't include cars built for European consumption, nor does the tally include the fact Capri production continued in Europe in 1987. And no, we're not talking about the Fox-bodied Mustang. We're talking about that German Capri. Lincoln Mercury ceased importations after 1978 to turn attention to the new for 1979 Fox-body Capri. Okay, that's the end of fact number 593, and it's also the end of this episode of the Steve Aggs Muscle Car Show podcast, which is brought to you by High Octane Classics, the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership, located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. Give them a call at 508-859-4515. So until next week, when we jump back into the book at fact number 594, hasta mañana.